Work. All right, Nathan, why don't we begin and tell me a little bit about yourself?
Um, let's see. I am a missionary kid. My parents were Presbyterian missionaries in the PCUSA church in Croatia. Um, they were there for 10 years. I was born after two. Before that, they were in Romania. Um, and before that, they were in Kenya for a little bit, just a couple months. But they were in Croatia, they were mainly doing work on um, nonviolent like peace negotiations. So that was pressing at the time. The year I was born was when the Serbo-Croatian Civil War ended. So tensions were pretty high. Um, and then, yeah, when I was eight, my family moved back to the States. I also have an older brother. He's 5 years older. Um, and so, kind of spent late elementary through high school in South Alabama. Little bit of culture shock, but I was young enough, I adapted quickly. And
How'd that go for your brother?
I think it was tough. Um, yeah, but there there were enough problems in Croatia that it was kind of good to escape. Uh,
I can imagine.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's the age that kids, I mean, missionary kids, they're often third culture, and so the age that you re-enter, it's for them sometimes sort of entering. And with every kid, it's different because sometimes missionary life is sort of within a compound, within an expat bubble. Other times it's much more within the culture. And it depends a lot too on the element of the culture. Croatia,
Mhm.
it's a little easier to, yeah, there's just a myriad of dynamics. So what was that like for you coming back to the States? Had you been to the States often during your time or? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. We visited every couple of years. So it wasn't too bad for me. It was like horrible at the time, right? Because I was losing basically all of my friends that I had known for my whole life at that point. But yeah, we were definitely not like I have cousins who grew up in West Africa who their parents were also missionaries, and they were very much in like the academy there that was like for expats and missionary kids and all of that.
Yeah.
Whereas we went to the Croatian public school that was across the street.
Oh,
Um, and so I think it was harder for my brother because he came in as like the American kid and I was born there. So even though my parents were American and I was kind of the American kid, I was also fully Croatian. I was, a naturalized citizen. I spoke it fluently. I didn't have an American accent or anything.
yeah.
And neither did my brother. He was young enough that he learned it very well.
Yeah.
But still, that was tough for him when he moved back, I think, to get adjusted.
Yeah. What's the Croatian language like?
Uh, the Croatian language is Croatian. It's a lot like Serbian. They're almost the same language. Um, so it's a Slavic language. So if you hear
Okay.
it and you don't know, you would think you're hearing Russian or something.
Okay.
But they use the Roman alphabet, so you can see the words, and if you know how to pronounce it, you can just read it. Um, you don't have to learn a whole new alphabet or anything.
Okay. Yeah, because it's in there's a lot of different pieces, in that former Ottoman Empire. You've got Slavic influence, you've got, obviously Greek, Latin influence, Greek influence. I mean, it's right there in the middle of the world in a lot of ways. So I was just curious. I don't know anything about Croatia or their language. So it's again the Balkanization. The reason we have this word is because there's all these little patches of. So I didn't quite know what alignment that patch would be. So that's interesting.
Yep, yep.
So talk to me about what church life was like while you were in Croatia and what it was like when you came back to the States.
Yeah. So honestly, I don't remember much about what church life was like in Croatia. I remember, vaguely going to church. My dad um, was a minister. Um, so, we
Did
were
your
there.
father pastor a church in Croatia?
Um, I don't think he pastored a church. I think because he was part of um, the school there where they taught classes, and then he would go to the church. Honestly, my memory of it is pretty fuzzy, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, 8 years old. I mean, you're an 8-year-old's world is an 8-year-old's world. Homeschool, that kind of thing.
yeah, but I think his involvement mainly was at the seminary there, and he was offered to become the dean at one point. Um, and that was a horrible idea, and so the work was just really eating him up, and he wasn't connecting very well to the student body. So even though he was kind of the person on point that people wanted, he absolutely did not want that position.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that kind of was one of the things that spurred us to move back to the States. Was my dad was getting a bit burnt out.
Yeah. It's, boy, details matter, especially if you know a little bit of something. Because PC, so when you came back to the States, did you worship in then a PC USA church in the South?
Uh, yeah, I actually don't know. So for a couple of years we went to a church in a nearby town, and that during those couple of years, my dad started his own painting company, and then he found a church to become the pastor of, and that was a PC USA church.
Okay.
But I can't remember if the one we attended for a little bit was PC USA or PCA. I'm guessing
Yeah.
it's in the same denomination, right? I'm not sure.
Well, this is so hard because, the PCA is a split off of the PC USA,
Mhm.
but there continue to be conservative-ish churches in the PCUSA. The main line is such a, there's a lot, there's more diversity in the main line than people think when they just hear main line. So, I recently did a conversation with Ross Bird, who grew up Episcopalian. He's still quite evangelical. That surprises people again because we tend to have these low resolution pictures of things. So talk to me about what you do remember of church growing up here in the States.
Um, I remember not loving it. Um, I remember hating the music. Um, and feeling like I didn't really connect with the people of my age around there, and that there weren't many of them. Like
Mm.
especially when my dad became a pastor, he became a pastor um, in South Alabama, where the church had its attendance peak during the summer. Sorry, during the winter when the snowbirds were all coming down. Um,
Oh,
and
that far south in
yeah,
Alabama.
yeah, yeah,
In
yeah,
places in the South, the further you go north, the further you go south. So that's what I always joke in Florida. So yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean, this was Gulf Shores,
yeah,
so
yeah,
I don't. Yeah, and so he um, it was definitely a liberalizing force, even in the PCUSA.
yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I remember kind of um, appreciating that at the time. Um, and that kind of kept me somewhat interested in his sermons. Whereas I went to a youth group that was closer to where we lived. His church was an hour away from where we lived, and I went to the youth group that was closer by. Um, and the youth group was a Methodist youth group, and that was much more conservative. And so I kind of rubbed up against that. Um, and yeah, I played in the youth praise band. I played in the contemporary service at my dad's church. I didn't particularly like any of that because all of the music I liked was, kind of edgy and um, yeah, not very churchy.
So what was the contemporary service like in your dad's church?
It was,
Was it evangelical or was it because there's a contemporary version of mainline music too?
yeah, it was more along that. I think it was, some Hillsong songs, but not like nobody's standing up holding up their hands. It's all old people, even at the contemporary service. So it's just people who didn't like the hymns really. Otherwise, it was pretty much the same service. And it was, instead of being in the sanctuary, it was held in the fellowship hall. Um, and so there wasn't like a lectern, there wasn't a choir. There was my dad. singing and playing guitar along with a couple of older ladies as singing assistants, and then me
Yeah.
playing bass. Occasionally, we had a drummer come in and help us out a little bit. Um,
What years were these? Were these the teens?
let's see, I graduated high school in 2014. So yeah, this would have been like 2008 to 2014, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. That makes I can very much see that. Living Stones in some ways wasn't too far from that. We did more contemporary music. You've got some, predominantly boomers in there, and the boomers will have, depending on sort of their own individual spiritual journeys. I mean, here in Sacramento, it skews much more African American in terms of my particular church, but no, I can very much see because in the 90s and aughts, a lot of even mainline churches went through sort of worship wars in terms of traditional versus contemporary. And then there was this whole, I mean, there's all these different layers that sort of overlap. So you're playing bass, your dad's playing guitar, you've got some vocalists, you got a praise team going on, but it's predominantly an older church. You got a lot of snowbirds coming through. I can get the picture. I can get the picture.
Yeah, and because it was an hour away, I wasn't there anytime besides Sunday morning, so I
Right.
wasn't really connecting with them.
Or
I
kids you're going to school with. You went to a public school?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and the kids I connected to in public school were, kids who were experimenting with pot and
yeah,
into more hardcore music, and
yeah,
um it's kind of skater culture adjacent. Um, so that was the crowd I was kind of drawn towards.
yeah.
And the youth group kids were not like that. And so I felt kind of like an odd duck. Yeah.
Hmm.
Uh,
Interesting.
yeah. So then, when I got to college, I was like, "Woo, I'm free. I don't
Yeah.
have to worry about any of that."
What kind of college did you go to?
University of Southern Mississippi, so state school.
Yep.
Uh, and I was studying chemistry. Um, excuse me. And at that time, I started what I as part of my like electives. I had some options, and I took a comparative religion class, and I really enjoyed that. Um, and to the point where like I went home and talked to my parents, and I said, I think I might switch to a religion major. And my parents, God bless them, missionaries and very involved in the church, they were like, don't do that. Stick with chemistry. So I did. And I took a bunch of religion classes. So I took Intro to Buddhism, Tibetan religions, Intro to Islam, Indian religions. And I ended up taking enough that I finished with a religion minor. Um, yeah, philosophy of religion. Uh, Anything except Christianity.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But one of the things I really appreciated was um, that it gave me a sort of sociological lens for religion. And so, uh, like something I left out was my dad was much more of the liberal bent, and so I felt much more comfortable talking religion with him. Um, my mom was much more conservative religiously. Um, and so I would get in arguments with her a lot, and those uh, would get tough. Um, but after going through some of these classes, I at least gained an appreciation that this was something that provided like deep meaning, and that like maybe I shouldn't be so mean to my mom.
You
um,
shouldn't be so mean to your mom.
yeah,
She's your
yeah,
mom. Come
yeah,
on.
yeah. Of course, of course. Um, excuse me. Yeah, so yeah, and I also left out like growing up, my dad would have these like late night Socratic dialogues with us basically, where like he was reading like a lot of Jonathan Haidt. Um and so he would do like the whole moral dumbfounding thing with us. where he would like ask us, why is this wrong? Why is this wrong? And just keep going down the chain. And it was, I don't know. I don't know. It's just wrong. And that was frustrating, but I think very useful. Um, but then he also did that with certain like theological questions that I think even he was grappling, perhaps still grapples with,
Sure.
like penal substitutionary atonement.
Yeah.
Um, at some point, like the way he described it was like, yeah, God like owes a debt to God and is like damning his own son for it. And like,
Yeah.
isn't that kind of messed up? And it's like, yeah, that does sound kind of messed up. Like,
Yeah.
what's going on here? And it didn't seem like he had a really satisfying answer for himself either.
Yeah.
Um, so that was the whole milieu, and also, the crowd I was hanging out with was very liberal leaning, but the religious environment I was in was very conservative,
Yeah.
and so you know, I think I experienced what many people do with the Christian faith is that they kind of try to boil down Christianity to like niceness,
Yeah.
and then they see how like Southern conservative Christians, their attitudes towards like gay people, for example,
Yeah.
um, and like this also plugs into me being like the science kid. That was kind of like a narrative I got plugged into very early on because I had
Yeah.
for that. And so being plugged into that, you kind of develop a resistance towards religiosity
Yeah.
as, as something like, well, science will explain that. And then
Yeah.
also you see something like homosexuality and you think, well, there's no good reason. This is just like backwardsness
Yeah.
that uh,
Right.
is actually contradictory to their central message. So
Right.
I'm just going to like forego all of this and
Right.
not bother. And there's the whole element of there were prescriptions that were making me feel guilty for doing things I wanted to do.
Yeah, there's that too.
Yeah, so there was that whole mess of things, and so finally, college, I was like, none of that anymore.
Liberated.
Yeah, Lord of mercy. Um, so I go through that, and then that kind of continues. I finish college in 2018, then I go off to grad school in Oregon, um, and
For chemistry?
yes, with a focus on semiconductors. Yeah, but yeah, for chemistry, I wanted to go into the solar industry.
Okay.
That ended up not working out. Um,
I just wanted to make sure you didn't go to grad school for religion.
no, yeah, no,
Because your parents are like, yeah, do STEM, they're worried about that. You're worried about you eating in the future, but I've talked to many people, it's like, I'll do STEM for my parents, but I'll do religion for me.
yeah, yeah. So I think that's around the time Jordan Peterson started popping up. That would have been, yeah, I think maybe I discovered him. Funny enough, my dad sent me one of his early talks on like the difference between evil and malevolence. Um, super early. Um, and then YouTube started recommending his Genesis lectures, and I was getting really lost and confused. But I was fascinated, and then you started popping up, and you helped me a lot to make sense of Jordan Peterson. Um, so during that time, um, I should also note, a little bit before I went off to grad school during one of the summers, um, uh, in college, my parents got divorced. Uh,
Oh, oh
yeah,
my. That's a big deal.
yeah. Um, and thankfully, as far as divorces go, I think it was about as easy as it could have been. I was out of the house. My brother, was long out of the house.
Yeah.
Uh, I was kind of expecting it because I was seeing them fight and stuff. Uh,
Mm,
and yeah, and they were not like they weren't being mean.
mm.
That was a big
That's
thing.
good.
They were being respectful.
Yeah.
Uh, so for what it's worth, as divorces go, I think it was as smooth of one as can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jordan Peterson comes and starts kind of lighting a fire under my ass, and
Yeah.
he gets me really pursuing this whole meaning thing. And his Genesis lectures, because they were from that psychological perspective, kind
Yeah.
of allowed me to peek back in and say, okay,
Yeah.
there's probably some good stuff here that I kind of uh, too hastily thrown away.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when he gets into the Piaget stuff of like, you have to act things out before you can really believe
Yeah.
them or understand them. And
Yeah.
I was like, well, I guess I got to start going to church again because I agree
Yeah.
with all these, Western values. Uh,
Yeah.
um, so, and by then, I think I had discovered Pajot through Peterson. So I'm like a walking cliche, Paul.
Well, it's not a huge cliche. I know through this tiny little lens of the internet, it might seem like lots of people, but relatively speaking, it's so don't beat yourself up too badly on that score.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm thankful.
So tell me about tell me about your first forays into the Orthodox Church.
Yeah, so around this time, so I was living in Oregon. I was doing an internship as a part of my master's, and I decided to maybe it's time to go to church again. I checked out a nearby Presbyterian church, remembered why I didn't like it,
Yeah,
uh, and had been listening to Pacho for a while.
yeah,
And a lot of the theological issues I had harbored were kind of clicking into place, along with my own mindset, kind of recognizing um, just problems with the worldview I was having. Um, um, yeah, well, I think a lot of it boils down to like what Thomas Sowell says about there's no solutions, only compromises.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and that's like a truth that's very hard to acknowledge when you have this certain like scientific liberal mindset where he's like, no, we can engineer our way out of everything.
yeah,
Uh, and there's not that room for human nature.
yeah,
Uh, so I was starting to accept some of those things. Um, and so listening to Pacho was helping, and I checked out a nearby Orthodox church. I didn't even know enough at the time about Orthodoxy to know what kind of Orthodox church it was. It was clearly not huge. It was like a old like mall building or something that had been repurposed.
hmm
Um, and it was just so strange and weird. I didn't stick around to chat at coffee hour, even though, the
yeah,
little interactions I had, people were perfectly pleasant. I was just so
yeah,
lost.
yeah,
So I kind of gave up on that. And then my internship ended. I started applying for jobs like crazy, and I knew I wanted to be back closer to home, closer to my family.
yeah,
Uh, I guess the divorce kind of made their absence kind of
yeah,
feel more present, where I was like, what am I doing out here? Like it's
yeah,
great. I love the West Coast,
yeah,
it is so beautiful.
yeah,
But I don't think I'm going to be in a position in life to like buy plane tickets all the time.
yeah,
Um, so, especially growing up, I was really close with my brother. Um,
mm.
and so it was hard to be so far away from him. Um, so I ended up getting a job in Louisiana. So that brings me back much closer to home. Um, and I lost the train. Um,
Well, well, you know, I want to be careful here, because your parents' story is not your story, and so I'm not going to ask you to delve into that at all.
right.
But it is connected to your story and the fact that you said you wanted to go back to be closer to your parents. Part of what happens in a divorce is that before the divorce, your parents care for each other. After the divorce, I've often seen that children, especially um, conscientious children, tend to step up and worry about mom and or dad. Usually in a divorce, It's so, and I'm not going to ask you to divulge anything about your parents' lives, but I'll just make these generalizations, knowing nothing about your parents' lives. So nobody hearing this can say that I'm talking about your parents because I'm not, because I know nothing about them. This is the first conversation we've ever had. But when a marriage breaks up, especially later in life, like your parents did, it's not it's not often terribly even. One might, and again, you don't have to, don't feel necessary to, disclose anything here. Sometimes one parent will enter into a relationship quickly and the other won't. Sometimes financially, for one reason or another, one is in better shape than the other. Sometimes emotionally, for one reason or not, someone is in better shape than the other. So what often happens in a divorce is that the kids step up and start to, in some ways, parent the parents, and so that will tend to draw, if you're on the other side of the country, you're like, I should really go home and be by my parents because they're my parents and I love them and I'm worried about them, and they've been through a divorce. Is a significant, even if it's a relatively good divorce, a divorce is a significant trauma. It's a
Mm.
significant trauma. I've often seen that. In fact, divorce is harder than losing a spouse to death in some cases, because at least if you lose a spouse to death, that person's story sort of stops. You don't have to care for them anymore. And it's not complicated. It's not complicated in terms of okay, what do we do for Christmas? What do we do for Thanksgiving? And I mean, divorces are so complex needless that all that I'm saying is I completely understand, and you don't really have to explain the reason to move closer to your parents, if
Yeah,
in fact they stay in the same area.
you're right. Well, and they didn't.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. But all of the above.
Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you move back to, and
Yes.
culturally, well, are you more, because again, like I said, the more you move north, the more you move south on these, when it comes to sort of the Gulf and the coasts, because
Mhm.
the coasts bring wealth and culture. And so there's a real difference I find in these communities between, let's say, coastal culture and then inland culture. And now you've already sort of been on the liberal side of the PCUSA. You're already a third culture person. And what I find with third culture people is that they are far more culturally in tune and adept, and
Mm.
so that they can sort of move around cultures more easily, whereas monoculture people tend to they're a little bit more secure within their monoculture, but it's going to take more work to go out of it. So you're coming back after being to college and having all of this experience, and then you come back to the American South.
Yeah.
So, and how's it going vocationally for you? Because that
Um,
transition from college into career is a super tough one. So, how's that going for you?
yeah, I think that was part of what was pushing the meaning searching thing because I went into the master's program wanting to work in solar because I had bought into the vision of a clean energy future, utopia. And by the kind of midpoint of my year-long internship, I was working at a company that makes electron microscopes, um, and mainly for chip manufacturing. Um, I realized just from looking around, there's no jobs to do solar stuff in the U.S.
China's doing all the solar.
Yes, but
Yeah.
even then, like not really on the efficiency side. They don't need semiconductor engineers to make better solar panels. They need civil engineers to integrate them into the electrical grid and battery chemistry engineers to make better batteries for energy storage. So it's totally in the wrong spot, basically. Um, and I just didn't care. I was kind of techie growing up, but by 2019, phones and computers were not exciting anymore. It was just kind of the same new thing every year, just a little bit faster, a little slimmer, lighter, larger screen, whatever. Um, so that wasn't interesting anymore. So thankfully, well, so it drew me to ask, what am I doing? Why? What should my career be? But also, um, I knew electron microscopes were used in the biological research world. So I started applying to a lot of biology labs to do electron microscopy. And so that's what I did in Louisiana. I did clinical electron microscopy, um, mostly with kidney biopsies. Um, and then I got recruited to work at St. Jude in Memphis, where I am now, doing, helping out with cancer research by doing EM, electron microscopy imaging. Um, but yeah, so Shreveport, Louisiana, where I was, there I really said, okay, I'm really going to give this church thing a try. I found a PCA Presbyterian church. I appreciated its conservatism because I was kind of on the Peterson train of like, this woke stuff has gone way too far. Um, you know, this is insanity. Um, I was sick of all the identity stuff. Um, and so I was looking for kind of some solace, and the PCA church very much was that. Um, and yeah, I was dating a girl who went to that church and became closer to their family. Um, just before she goes off to grad school, we break up, and then I get recruited to work at St. Jude. Um, so then I moved to Memphis, and I kind of take that as my fresh start. Okay, I don't know anybody in Memphis. Let's check out the Orthodox Church again. I go once, again, I find it too weird, and I go back to a Presbyterian church. But then something had changed where the Presbyterian service felt very whitewashed,
Hmm.
almost literally, because the walls were all white. Um,
Oh,
and
interesting.
this church in Memphis, St. John's, it's just covered with
Yeah.
iconography. A lot of Orthodox churches, when they're smaller and more humble, they can't afford to paint on the walls, so they just buy little icons and hang them. But St. John's is pretty well established, and so they're just decked out. And so after about a month or maybe two, I really feel the pull to go back, and I stick with it, and I learn the liturgy, and yeah, I become a catechumen. Um, and after about a year of attending, I get received into the church. That was maybe September 2022.
Were you rebaptized?
No, I was chrismated.
Okay. Okay. Because I know that's, I mean, as the deeper I get into this strange world of Orthodoxy, it's like, oh, look at all the different little fights they're having over. I was just reading, and now especially with Substack,
Mm-hmm.
just scanning Substack, and I just because of course my own strange journey over the last few years, I'm subscribed to a lot of young, new Orthodox Substackers, and so it's just fascinating to me watching their little tensions and conversations and things. So 2022, so you've been in a few years now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What's the deal in terms of marriage and dating? Are you single now in a relationship, married? Where's that at?
Thank God I'm in a relationship.
Okay.
There's an Orthodox dating app. Um,
Of course there is, but
yeah, yeah,
oh,
yeah,
oh boy, my imagination is just flying in lots of different directions.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I'd given up on it, but my god sister actually met her now husband on there. So I said, okay, fine, I'll give it another shot. Um, and I matched with a lovely woman who is only one state away. Most of them are in California or New York. Um, so I said, I can make this work. And actually, she's not far from my brother. So I went and stayed with him, and then we met up and got dinner. And yeah, that's been going very well. In
Well, wait, wait,
fact,
wait. We got to talk more about this app. We got to talk
okay,
more about. Now, most of the girls children of immigrants
a
or
good
converts?
a good portion of them are. I mean, I'm just kind of judging off of appearances.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, well, you look at last names and you look at
yeah.
like, it's like if there was a CRC. I can make a CRC dating app. I think I'm a little behind. We had Calvin College for that back in the day, or Calvin and Dort and Trinity. That was the CRC dating app. It was Calvin College where my parents went, where my wife, blah 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 blah. So, but if you'd see the Dutch last name, it would be a Tell. So the Appleses and the so I was just curious because one of the things that I've seen is that again, a lot of the Peterson Pizzo pipeline, a lot of dudes have been flowing through that pipeline, and the ladies, where there are some, because I know some, Cassidy, my friend, and some in the TLC who have come through, but the ratio of men to women in that pipeline, it's probably better than 20 to 1. Um,
I don't know if it's that severe, just because a lot of the converts are families. Um,
okay,
so it's definitely at least 5 to 1, maybe more. Yeah,
okay, okay,
20 might be a little strong. Um,
yeah,
not maybe not by much. Uh,
yeah,
yeah, so she converted just like a year or two before I did. Um,
okay.
she grew up Anglican, and her aunt and uncle converted, and then she was kind of considering becoming Catholic, and her aunt and uncle were like, "You should come with us, check out the Orthodox Church." Um,
Okay.
so I'll actually, I'm looking for jobs where she lives right now, and job or not, I'll be moving to her city at the
Way
end of.
to go. All right. That's you. Well, I don't know. Yeah, and again, if you were my son, I'd probably be like, but I love the romantic, heroic effort of that. Good. Go get that girl. Go get that
Yeah,
girl.
no, I
I
mean,
hope it works out.
if you met her, you'd be like, yep, yep, she's the one worth moving for sure.
All right. All right. Well, that's cool. That's really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
But
and all
that
of us
means you're
live
gonna
there.
have to get another church.
Well, she's a part of an Orthodox church there,
Right.
um, and I've visited it several times now, and it's lovely. It just feels like a smaller version of St. John's, my current parish. Uh,
Okay.
it's very familial. I've already started getting close with people.
Okay.
There's really this amazing effect of when you go to convert heavy parishes, um, you just there's this instant bond of being an Orthodox convert. Um, so it wasn't hard to feel at home there at all.
Super interesting. Um, is it this? Are they both? What branch of Orthodoxy are they?
So I'm Antiochian currently, and they
Okay.
are OCA. Um,
Okay.
so I'll just move over. That's no problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this Orthodox thing over the next 30 years is going to be so interesting. It really, really is. Okay. So you're looking for work in that other city and you're gonna move and you're gonna change churches and you're gonna pursue the relationship. All this is good.
Yeah.
Um, so what else about your life did you want to talk about?
So I am right now on the young adult ministry team at my parish. Um, and that age range is like 18 to 35. That's a young adult. um,
What do they all have in common? Singleness?
no, it's
Okay, some are married.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's just the age range.
Okay.
The Yeah, but what does happen is the families tend to filter themselves out, and they
Right.
want to hang out with other families. A
Right.
few of them are more active, but yeah, it's mostly the single guys and a few. Um, well, I don't know that there's any single women now. There used to be a couple. Uh,
They get snatched up quick, baby. If
yeah,
you're, ladies, not a lot watching the channel, but if you're young and single and you want a man, go Orthodox. The picking's good.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, so it's a lot of single guys. And we're growing a lot. It's just more and more guys like
Yeah.
almost every week.
Yeah.
We had a guy, his first Orthodox service with Pascha, Easter.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, "What? You chose this as your first service? Like, way to dive in head first."
Yeah.
but he seems like a great guy. He's come back since. And so something I wanted to pick your brain about is if you had any advice on like how to manage the the scale of it, because it's becoming a lot for a small team. Like, first of all, not everybody has the skills to kind of be on a young adult ministry team where you're planning and making events happen, and then having the gifts to approach people and get them on board with coming to an event, um, and introducing yourself to new people all the time. Um, so, our team stayed pretty small compared to the size of our young adults group.
Yeah.
And thankfully, our church is very social and good at receiving new people. But, some kind of organic groups have formed. And then we're starting to see some people kind of show up and slip through the cracks a bit. So
Yeah.
we've got this plan to try and kind of break things into small groups and not
Yeah.
forcing these small groups to hang out, but just kind of giving them a commitment. Oh, because the other thing is like we need these people to volunteer more. We need it can't just be all the old people doing everything all the time. Um, so uh, our hope is we have these smaller groups with like a contact person in each group, um, and then they can kind of not lead the group, but kind of be somebody that we can check in with, see how things are going. They can come to us for help. And our only requirements for these groups are like once per liturgical season, you go to a non-Sunday service together and then like go hang out afterwards. Um, and you keep each other in your prayer list, and then you choose one thing as like an almsgiving or a service project. Um, so we're trying to keep the responsibilities low
Right.
so that people don't get turned off. But like so we're thinking about how do we divide these groups, and like one option was like, okay, let's try and encourage the moms and dads to have kind of their own social time. So we're going to have a mom's group and a dad's group, but
Yeah.
like they already do a lot of things together. So we might
Yeah.
pitch this idea to them, and they're going to be like, why do you want to rope us into this? We're already doing stuff. We're super busy. Um, so
What
yeah.
would the people in these groups well, first of all, what is the purpose of these groups according to the church? And what is the purpose of these groups according to the people who are involved in these groups? Because
Mhm.
here's the thing, from the perspective of the church, I understand what your anxieties are. Now, with respect to people stepping up, you're going to have to ask.
Mhm.
And I would say don't be too shy in asking because already in the asking, you're going to do some triage, reverse triage in a sense, and you're going to see who your what you're going to see what the capacity of the people are and who's willing to step up and do what. So it's often a case in churches that they ask too little too late of people. Now, I understand the reason churches are hesitant to ask is because the asking then it provokes a moment of decision. And for that person, they will then understand that this church is going to ask a lot of me. Fairly mature people who aren't in a position to say yes, but understand that saying no might lead down or leaving or just ghosting might cause another problem. They will stand and say, these are the reasons in my life I can't say yes to you right now. I appreciate being asked. Ask again in 6 months or a year. There are some mature people who can do that. There are other people that you're going to ask and they're going to get scared and they're going to ghost. And the reason you don't ask is because you know that dynamic, and so you don't want to ask too soon. It's not very different from navigating the levels in a romantic relationship. When do you say I love you first? And how does that go? Because you understand that there are levels, And what human beings are always doing is they're sort of looking across the way and say, how much can I rely on you? And you don't want to ask too much too soon because then you scare them away. So I get the whole dynamic. And I also then get the fact that churches are always dealing with the one-to-many issue because what has attracted, oh gosh, this stuff is so complex. And there's, I mean, churches and pastors continually rack their brain on these kinds of issues. And if your church is small and growth is at a reasonable rate, it's fairly easy because you know the people as individuals well enough to sort of have a sense of the timing for the ask. It's still a little fraught because you never quite know what they're going to say when you make the ask, and sometimes you make the ask because it's what you need, not what they're ready for, and so you kind of stretch that way. But I understand how you want to have these groups because this is just right out of the mega church playbook because part of the reason mega churches are the way they are is because they're constantly dealing with this challenge of scale. And again, my impression is that most Orthodox people and pastors, the scale, oh gosh, there's so much here. The scale is provoked by the internet. Let's just be frank.
Hmm.
Many of these people coming in are coming in because they have this cliched story like you do. And what that has provoked is something of a crisis. And the Christian Reformed Church, part of the reason the Christian Reformed Church never really did well with megachurches is because we've got enough sort of traditional DNA in us where we require a lot of preparation for clergy. Um, the it is the kinds of practices that scaling has provoked in the American megachurch feel uncomfortable for many in traditional churches for good reasons. Because there's, you have to jettison a degree of wisdom to do this.
Hmm.
But what you realize then, if you're experiencing fast growth, is that just like you said about the Thomas, there's just trade-offs. And so part of what has given the Orthodox Church credibility has been their unwillingness to compromise. So that steep slope, hard edge, hardcore prophilicity is part of what's attracting people. But when it comes to the vast majority of normies, you also know well and good that people's level of aspiration and romanticism when they come in versus their actual capacity to do something hard. There's a lot of people with a lot of aspiration and inspiration that are coming in, they're going to do something hard. And the minute something hard is requested of them, they won't do it. Again, the one of my church planters, we've taught this the Orthodox thing isn't just Peterson and Peugeot. It's been around before that. And so again, one of my friends who has a CRC church, it's fairly Anglican-ish. It's much more sacramental. And because that's way sort of the ancient modern, this has been going on in evangelical churches for a while now. And he told me, he said, and they're mostly men, all the men who have left my church because they said, I'm going to go Orthodox because this CRC with its liturgy and stuff isn't hardcore. There's no icons on the wall. There's no icons at all. And so I'm going to leave and go to Orthodox. And he said, none of them actually go. So Orthodoxy in their mind is aspirational, but it's not applicable. And fault's on them because, hey, I'm sure there's plenty of Orthodox churches that would love to have them.
Hmm.
But and this is, I've spoken with a number of Orthodox clergy about this and plenty of Orthodox lay people about this. Um, you're not really Orthodox if you don't actually go to church, okay? You're just a poser. Your
Yeah.
opposer's got some internet fascination with Orthodoxy. You like watching Peterson and Peugeot, but you don't actually go to church. Well, fine. You're ortho curious. That's great. But like Jonathan Peugeot says, start going to church. And it's, maybe you're at where you're at with respect to this. Fair enough. Keep watching in the internet, playing the TLC, do all those things. I'm totally fine with that. But if you're going to be Orthodox, be Orthodox.
Yeah.
And so you've got a lot of, and also you've got the fact that if you've got families coming in, you've probably got maybe the husband in the cliche is the one who's sort of driven it. The wife is sort of at arm's length. She's a little curious. You've got some kids in tow that have been to a variety of churches and they're just sort of confused. And now you've got a room with all these things on the wall that look a little strange. This isn't even like what's in the Catholic Church. And I mean, you have a world of complexity that's on your plate. So I'm saying this not because I have any answer for you, but just because I feel your pain.
Yeah.
And anything that you try, you're going to learn something, whether it works or not. You're going to learn something. I would, I don't even know if John Van Donk will kill me for saying this, but you know, estuary protocol does some good. But the question that you have to ask is, now I'm bringing in a modern management by objective criteria here.
Mhm.
What is your goal for these groups? If your goal is to not lose these people, there are trade-offs with that goal. Because again, I think part of the Orthodox mojo in this moment right now is we're hardcore. When we ask you to do something, if you're ready to do it, fine. If you're not, you're certainly welcome to come as many weeks a year as you want to come and participate as you will without actually being a member of this church. But we're not going to, it's kind of like my conversation with Martin Shaw. We're going to let you sit outside until you beg us to make us a member. And I think there's wisdom in that. But the trade-off in that is you're going to lose a lot of looky-loos who are a little ortho-curious, and they're going to sit here in the title pools for a long time and maybe lose interest and then wander back off into unchurched land or wind up in a megachurch or something. And, I myself don't have a problem with them say they're going to go Lutheran or Catholic or Pentecostal or something. That's fine. I have more problem with the fact that they're just going to stay in the shadows and be because there's something dangerous about Christian nominalism.
Mhm.
And there is an inoculatory effect in Christian nominalism where you're just Christian enough to not invite the chaos in your life, praise God, um, but you're not seriously Christian enough to, I mean, you just wind up being sort of lukewarm. And it's there's trade-offs everywhere. So
Yeah.
I probably helped you not at all in my little verbal processing, but there it was.
That's okay. It helps to talk about it nonetheless. Um, but yeah, in order to answer your question on the objective is simply to help connect these people to the life of the church. Um,
Okay, what do you mean by the life of the church?
well, that means going to the services, um, becoming educated in the Orthodox faith, eventually, if they are received into the church, then participating in the sacraments, um, all of that kind of thing. Um, and so, if people are connecting to the church and they're just not going to young adult events, that's fine. That's totally fine. Um, but what I don't want, and I think what um, other people at the church and my priest don't want, is to find out that somebody who had been attending for a few Sundays just stopped coming because nobody sat down and talked with them and said, "What's your story? Why are
Yeah,
you here at the Orthodox Church?" Because frankly, it's a conversation all of us love to have,
yeah,
especially like our parish is like 99% converts. So we love having that conversation. Why are you here? Nobody is here. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. A couple of people have shown up just because it was the church around the corner, and then they fell in love with it. Um, but almost nobody is there by chance. Almost everybody was looking for the Orthodox Church, um, and they want to be able to tell their story for what they're searching for, what they're struggling with. Um, and so if somebody ends up not finding a home in the church simply because nobody approached them and made them feel welcome, um, then I think that's a failure on our part. Um,
This is so interesting. This is so interesting because that's a seeker mentality. Now
yeah.
it's a hospitality mentality too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pastoral mentality. And so what you're really wrestling with again is the multiplication of ministers. You need, and again, I wonder. So part of what happens in the Protestant Reformation is we tend to look at the Protestant Reformation through the eyes of um, theological conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And fair enough, that's part of it. But you have the Black Death in Europe a little while before. You have the discovery of the Americas. So you've got the Columbian Exchange, and you've also at the same time got the rise of urbanization in Europe. So what plagues tended to do, obviously, was reduce urban centers. When a plague comes, you naturally flee the city and you go out into the country. People naturally spread out because in terms of infectious disease, the country is safer than the city. We have this deep insight that human beings, two stacked up together without the proper technology, causes disease and we die. And so part of what happens as the modern world gets going, and of course it's cause and effect here, is that more and more people are in cities. And you need the technologies to support that. Of course, the ancient world had it. Rome's had aqueducts and sewers and things like that, whether or not they had the ideas about germs. But the Protestant Reformation happens at a time and a place where you've got urbanization. And what that's going to do then is force these kinds of questions upon the church. And those kinds of questions are going to force questions about ordination, about priesthood, about catechesis, because human beings have these little periods of their life. And you rightly realize that you need, as a church, to sort of calibrate when people come in. You need individual assessment. These people need to be cared for individually. And this, again, when you look at the megachurch movement, why megachurches got really good, really fast at leadership, internal leadership multiplication. And they don't mean point leaders or even ordained leaders, they mean non ordained church leaders, mature Christians who can do one level of catechesis. And that's not an easy thing to do because oh gosh, this is the kind of question that pastors are always thinking about because we're always working on it because we're looking at people at an individual basis in every single conversation and asking ourselves, what can I do in this conversation to move this person one step closer to Christ? That's what we're thinking. And ideally, what you would have in your church is um well, you need to have regular conversations with all of those people, and they need to be good conversations. And you need to have trusted people within the leadership and network of your church to host those conversations because the priest can't.
Yep.
And so maybe you get a deacon or two in, but still, depending on the speed of growth, you're right. Y'all are feeling like you got some ripe fruit on that counter and you better act fast, and there's no way to can them. And that's in a sense what your groups want to do. You want to sort of can the people till to bring them to maturity so that you optimize your flow in and no one is lost. That's a holy motivation. But gosh, it's hard. And what's required again is multiplication of trusted leaders who can do basically a priestly assessment and then think about structure, catechesis, because you're really looking at pre-catechesis.
Mhm.
Now, again, estuary protocol might be helpful in these groups because now I've been running the estuary protocol for a year and a half now, every week in my church. And the group itself hasn't grown much, but it's been a very stable group. It's been a very cohesive group. The people that come really love it, and they've been able to share broadly. But what you would want, and this is the difficult thing. Again, I've worked the cell church model, I've seen the mega church model. What you want is you're going to need to have a network of leaders in all of those groups who can do basic pastoring. Now, in a sense, traditional churches have done this to a degree with the godparent model because that model tries to connect someone hopefully who's a little bit more mature in the faith with someone who's coming up in it.
Mhm.
But again, the question of scale and deployment and speed really come into effect. And so what you're looking to do is establish, and I hate to say it, but let's just be honest with things, it's sort of an industrial model because you're going to have a container for people that works according to your process. And you're a chemist. I mean, you understand what beakers and you understand that you you understand catalysts and heat and you want the right container for these people for the outcomes, but human beings are so much more complex than chemistry that and you wish that none would be lost. So
Mhm.
boy, what a great problem to have, but boy, what a hard problem to address.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really tough. And while I appreciate all those, I agree fully with everything you said. I think there is another dimension of something. I don't tune into the Friday live streams very often, but I did recently. And Michael, there's an Orthodox guy named
Yep.
Michael, I think,
Yep.
and he touched on the question of what are we actually all orienting our life around,
Yes.
and that it's not the church most of the time, actually. Like
Yes.
when he was talking about like where people are geographically located,
Yes.
it's not around the church.
No.
And that's, I think, another wrinkle of this, especially for converts. They're coming in and they have this whole non-Orthodox life that
Yes.
has demands on their attention and time, and they're legitimate. They're not superfluous demands.
Yes.
Um, and so the people who seem to naturally step in and really take an active role are really the people who probably need the church most apparently, that they
Yes.
really don't have a life outside of their church community. um, and so other people, they can come on Sundays and become regular and become faithful Orthodox Christians, but they're not going to avail themselves necessarily of all the opportunities to really connect more deeply and be a bit more sacrificial of other aspects of their life.
They are not.
Um, so that's another thing too, where I don't know that we should or could do anything about that, because that's kind of a question of the human heart and what are you willing to give up to enter more deeply into the spiritual life. Um, like we have this great book club for the young adults on Saturdays after Vespers. But a lot of people don't come to Saturday night Vespers. So that means our Saturday night book club group is really small. But for the people who are there, it's awesome. We're reading Sayings of the Desert Fathers right now. So we read, and it's broken up into all these just tiny little excerpts. So we read a little bit and then we just talk about it. And then we read the next little bit and talk about it. And if anything gets controversial or theologically muddy, we say, okay, we'll table that and we'll ask Father about it later. Um, so none of us are like theological teachers there. It's just very much a fellowship kind of thing. And that's great. And I wish just more people took advantage of it. But again, if they are connected to the church and they are participating in the sacraments, and they are, um, they're doing their struggle with fasting, with confession, and all of that stuff, then that's fine. We don't need to be the thing that loops them in. Um, but there is a dimension of a part of it is also like everything is kind of being taken care of right now by the original kind of founders of the church. A lot of them are still alive, but it's getting weird, wearing. It's wearing on them. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, because they're getting old.
You're where my church was 10 years ago, but you have a good flow of younger people. And so that's hopeful. So,
Yeah,
but you're right. You're asking the right question because, well, here's a couple things to think about. Not People have different levels of participation at church. And even though the church would like to keep people moving towards the center in that, not everyone will.
yeah,
Not everyone will. People are going to plateau at a certain level in the church. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But you're rightly noticing that if you want the church to really grow and be sustained over a long period of time, those people are going to have to move to the center. Another thing you're going to face, just recently, someone, a CRC, I think he's a minister, CRC, he's been writing a Substack about the CRC. And church, in a confessional church, people try to say, boil down the church into the confession. In a liturgical church, people will try to boil the church down into the liturgy. But the church is far more complex than the confession or the liturgy or the priest or the structure or the building or any of these things. And the older community was um, they were formed by things in that church and by things in the broader culture that cannot be duplicated. And the younger group is being formed even just by, you have all these converts. YouTube and the internet have been, formational for them. That's going to play out in the church too. And so, yeah, the truth is that, well, again, back to what I said earlier, the church leadership is going to have to, kind of pull up their big boy pants and start asking hard questions of people. Say, you know what? If you want this church to keep going, some of you need to step up into leadership. And in this tradition, that's going to require X, Y, and Z. And again, as a pastor, you do this all the time, and what you find is that some people beautifully rise to the occasion, and some people don't.
yeah,
Some people say yes, and then their performance is 50%. Some people say no, and they're a little claustrophobic that you asked, and they understand that by saying no, they've now lost status. People are hugely sensitive to those kinds of things, and so they kind of move away. But the number one thing, and I say this as a Calvinist, the number one thing is you can't control this ecosystem. You gotta give it to God. I mean,
yeah.
you gotta perform the best that you can, but you cannot control those other people. You try not to make stupid mistakes. You try to do the best you can with your area of responsibility, but there will be loss. You will win some and you will lose some.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is there's such a beautiful, warm culture at St. John's, and a lot of that is because it was a really tight knit group. Um, that I don't know if you heard about this group of evangelicals that kind of all at once became Orthodox, along with Peter Gilchrist. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, this was I can. I think there's like a little mini documentary about it
Hmm.
on YouTube that I could send you. Um, but yeah, it was a group of evangelicals. A lot of them were Campus Crusade people, um, and they kind of went off and studied different parts of early church
Yeah,
history, and they would come together. And then they started doing like house churches and like slowly adopting more and more Orthodox practices.
yeah,
And then they had to start kind of like begging different patriarchates to like receive them. And a lot of them didn't want anything to do with them. And finally, the Antiochian church was like, "Okay, this is kind of weird, but sure, we'll bring you in." And so a bunch of people were kind of ordained Orthodox priests overnight. Um, but a lot of these people like did buy property like right around the church, and they
yeah,
wanted that kind of village experience, and
yeah,
they're very closely connected.
yeah,
And so that gives them this warmth and this stability. And so what, I think so many of us want to see that continue, and we're seeing the kind of like it's getting a little frayed now. There's all this change, and
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. You're not going to duplicate it because you
no.
had there were those were hardcore motivated people formed by a certain thing, had a common experience. And in a sense, we have that here at Living Stones because many of the people that I inherited had had a pretty powerful experience 20, 30 years before. And that experience had polarized some, but it had bonded a lot. And a church can last a long time with that. But when you get a generational, um, when you have a generational shifting, you're not going to, some of that stuff will translate through, but some of it'll be lost because it just can't help. And part of what we're struggling with is so Orthodox and Catholic, and to a degree some magisterial Protestants inherit a broader than the church tradition, which also sustains the church. And when you're working with converts, you in a sense have to rebuild a whole civilization because even the Puritans who tried to, and the Pilgrims who tried to, use, let's say, state sanction to enforce church attendance were unsuccessful. And that just tells us something about the spread of human temperament and just how human beings are. We are not, we are very communal, but we are not fundamentally herd animals. We really aren't. And so, as soon as there's a herd, you're going to have a distribution that resists the herd. That's just the way it is. And so, you have a good problem to have, but it is a problem. And you're not going to solve it because it's never actually been solved by the church, especially if the church thinks in very mechanistic images.
Mhm.
That the mechanistic images tend to, um, I might have to talk to a landscaper in a minute, um, tend to think we're going to have everyone on board. Nope, it's not. Human beings are not uniform like that. Whether it's an industrial model or a herd model, we're just not. And so all of these difficult questions, even in your story, you're very motivated, but you're leaving one community for a girl. She's not moving to yours. You're changing jobs. I mean, it's very heroic and it's very romantic what you're doing, but you're leaving your parish and you're going to not only a different parish, but even a different little segment of the Orthodox Church.
Mhm.
And that is very American. It's very, you know, you're already leveraging a brand. Now, that's not completely new. Of course, they had it in the ancient world too, but it just you just have to appreciate that to realize the kind of challenges that you're going to face. And then as you try to, and I'm going to use this word, as you try to program small groups in your church, you're working with all of these challenges. So I've got to pay this landscaper
Yeah,
because we had a new landscaper that started working for us. But
yeah, great. Well, I've been
you
a
think it'd be
lurker for
okay
a
for
long
me to
time.
share this
Yeah, I
conversation?
think so. I
Okay.
think so.
Okay.
It's been a joy to talk with you, and I've been a lurker for a long time. The way you define lurker as somebody who wants to reach out, but doesn't. And a lot of that is just I'm not like an online community guy.
Yeah.
I've always had enough going on in my real life that I don't have the time to actually build relationships online. But I've been tracking the corner for a long time, and I really value it, and it's helped me a lot. So I appreciate that, Paul.
Well, let's wait a little while, and when you get something going or you try some things and you learn some things, I'd love to hear back from you to find out just what you're doing because I'm very curious about how churches work and what they try and what you learn. So I'd really love to know um, how that goes. So, well, you got a big change coming up, so I mean,
Yeah,
you're going to be in a different church, and so you'll learn things in that transition too. So, and
yeah,
you'll
and
learn a
even
ton as you go deeper into the relationship.
yeah, that one's growing a lot too, and that one's actually has less of an older contingent and is almost all young families, and they just bought a new building, so they're going to be growing even more. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Wow. Wow. Super cool. Super
Yeah,
cool.
great.
Nathan, thank you for reaching out. And yeah, keep in touch because I'm really curious about how this all develops.
Okay. Thank you,
All
Paul.
right. Take
Bless.
care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.